Welcome to my presentation titled Clash of Civilizations. Through the Arab Barometer, I will be studying negative attitudes towards democracy in the country Jordan. I will be constructing an index and will measure its reliability with the use of Cronbach's alpha. I will then be choosing three independent variables that will help explain variation in my dependent variable. These independent variables will be tested in an analysis of variance, and their measure of association will be tested with tau c, and the statistical significance of the sample will be tested through chi-squared in order to reject the null hypothesis. The first hypothesis that I will test is that negative attitudes towards gender equality lead to negative attitudes towards democracy. In order to measure this, I will be using the independent variable equal, which is recoded to give a high value to negative attitudes towards equality. As democracy promotes liberty and equality, responses with negative attitudes towards these beliefs will likely reject democracy. This was examined by Engelhardt and Norris in the 2003 article titled The True Clash of Civilizations, stating that the true divide between Muslim and Western countries is due to difference in opinions about gender equality and rights, and Islamic countries are too traditional for Western democratic beliefs. The second hypothesis that I will test is that satisfaction with current government will lead to negative attitudes towards democracies. The independent variable needs will be used to test this hypothesis. This variable was recoded to give a high value to positive attitudes towards current government. This hypothesis was formulated on the basis of the Constitution of Jordan, where all rights are given to the king and his heirs. Therefore, satisfaction with this type of government will not support democracy, which would represent a radical change. Lastly, I will be testing a third hypothesis, that religious incompatibility leads to dissatisfaction with democracy. The independent variable Islam was recoded to attribute high values with religious incompatibility. This hypothesis is an extension of Samuel Huntington's theory of the clash of civilizations, in which he argues that religious differences are far too great between Islamic and Western countries, and democratization will only lead to conflict between civilizations. Ordinal indicators representing negative attitudes towards democracies through lack of strong economies, weak decision-making, and not maintaining orders were combined into an index. Negative attitudes were given high values. After running a reliability analysis, the standardized alpha score was 0.74. Since this value is greater than 0.6, it can be concluded that the questions are related enough to combine into an index. By looking at the alpha item if deleted, it can be seen that the alpha score will not rise up by removing any one of the indices. The raw frequency distribution of the index is examined for measures of central tendency, and the standard deviation ensures enough variation around the mean. The shape of the distribution indicates that the scores fall to the left of the mean, and the shape is somewhat peaked. Since both scores are below the value of 3, this index is reliable when being used in cross-tabulation. The raw index was then recoded, giving high values to negative attitudes towards democracies, and each independent variable yielded low F values, concluding that there is a very small chance that the observed differences are simply due to sampling error. To test the first hypothesis, a cross-tabulation is run on the recoded dependent and independent variable, and the column percentages show a pattern on the off-diagonal. The tau c value will indicate a measure of association of negative 0.08, indicating that the relationship is inverse and very weak. However, since this value is not 0, the relationship does indeed exist, and this is complemented by the chi-squared value of 0.01, which indicates that the differences in the dependent variable across the categories of the independent variable are unlikely to be due to chance, and disprove the null hypothesis that no relationship exists between the dependent and independent variables. The next cross-tabulation tests my second hypothesis. It can be observed that the relationship lies weakly on the main diagonal. The very weak tau c value of 0.11 indicates that these results are minimally acceptable. The extremely low chi-squared value indicates that these results are very unlikely to be due to chance, disproving the null hypothesis. Therefore, satisfaction with the current government is a weak predictor of dissatisfaction with democracy. The last cross-tabulation tests my third hypothesis. The relationship lies on the main diagonal, indicating a positive relationship between the dependent and independent variables. The moderately strong tau c value of 0.26 indicates that religious incompatibility is acceptable, explaining negative attitudes towards democracy. The extremely low chi-squared value is statistically significant, and it is very unlikely that the results are due to chance, disproving the null hypothesis. A further examination of the Scheffe test confirms this divide between negative and positive attitudes. To conclude, female rights and satisfaction with current government are not strong measures of negative attitudes towards democracy. However, My third hypothesis is confirmed, and the more a person believes that a democracy is not compatible with Islam, the more likely they are to have negative attitudes towards democracy. Now that one possible explanation for negative attitudes towards democracy is found, it is important to identify further prospective research to identify what aspect of democracy is incompatible with Islam. To do so, the independent variable Islam can be used as a dependent variable to further explore the subject that Samuel Huntington originally stated.